I'm Clint Gilchrist. I'm the director of the Sublette County Historical Society and the Museum of the Mountain Man. The Sublette County Historical Society owns this historical park right here. We are currently at the Lander Trail New Fork River Crossing Historical Park. We shorten it to just New Fork Park, but this is where in the 1860s tens of thousands of immigrants crossed the New Fork River on their way eventually to go to Oregon and California, and some even to the goldfields of Montana and Idaho. The Lander Trail was a cutoff of the Oregon Trail that went from South Pass to Fort Hall in Idaho. It's late August, and so this is actually low water compared to what the immigrants would have encountered. This is probably only waist deep water here now, but when the immigrants came through, they would have come through in late June, early July, which would have been the highest water. As you can see, the bank over there, water would have been as high as the bank, so there could have been 6-8 foot of water here depending on when they came through. And so there was really 3 different ways they got across. If they came late in the year like this, which very few did, they could actually just drive their wagons across. But if they came with medium high water, so let's say like 3 or 4 or 5 feet of water, they could actually jack up their wagon boxes and just get the boxes up off of the wheels a little bit, and it could give them an extra foot or so, and they could sometimes drive across that way. It was a little bit dangerous because your wagon's not as stable, but they would use ropes to help them steady it, and they could bring it across. But in the really high water, they had no choice but to float it across. And really what they had to do is they'd usually take one wagon apart and use it as a ferry to ferry goods across. They would take the other wagons apart and put them on that boat, and they would take a rope across the river, and they would have a bunch of guys over here pulling those ropes and pulling the wagon over, and they would pull over all the goods that were unloaded from each wagon. They would pull across the wagon parts, the box, the running gear, and then when they got back over here, there was a group of people whose job was to put all the wagons back together and to put the goods back in the wagons. So they would spend a day or two here sometimes crossing. If a wagon train of 100 wagons came, it may take them a full day to get across. And so it was a very dangerous crossing. When the river's high, it's very fast, very swift. Even today, when you come through at high water, it's almost scary to stand here next to the river of how fast that water's going down the channel. And so it was a very dangerous place. There were people who lost their lives here crossing. Usually the livestock had to swim across, and so they'd usually start them at an angle. So start up there somewhere and start streaming them across, and they would float down as they were crossing, and they would hopefully get up on the bank somewhere on the other downriver. But they lost a lot of livestock that way too. Had wagons turned over in the water, which a lot of times destroyed the wagons. So this was a very noteworthy spot for the immigrants that were here. It was a very dangerous spot, but the real nice thing about it was kind of a positive and a negative. Once you got across the river, there's just this beautiful cottonwood trees and grass, and it's just lush and plenty of water, and it was just a paradise after coming across mainly desert areas to get here. And a lot of times they would like to stay just for that reason, is it was just a place to take a break before you headed on the desert some more. The other bad side was just 5 miles from here was the Green River, which was just as difficult as the New Fork River. So after the immigrant era, land like this was homesteaded and became private property. Most of it was turned into fields, and so it completely changed the landscape. This was really unique because the island was here, and the homesteaders who homesteaded, even though it did become private property, didn't develop it. So the property looks very much like it did when the immigrants came through here. So back in 2008, 2009, there was a big natural gas boom in the Pinedale anticline about 5 miles to the east of here, and the trail went right through there, and all the activity was impacting the trail and the scenic setting of the trail. So they were looking for mitigation projects. There were thousands of wells drilled, and they were looking for an overall mitigation project to try to compensate for the impact of the trails. And the idea came up of there are no river crossings that are in public hands. There are no river crossings that the public can go to and see where immigrants cross the river. And so the idea came up, hey, why don't we try to buy one of these, especially this piece of property that hadn't been developed. It was on the market at the time. And so along with federal government, BLM, and state government, local government, private industry, came up with a deal to where 3 energy companies, Shell Oil, Ultra Petroleum, and Rocky Mountain Power, each paid 1/3 of the cost to buy this property and create a permanent park here that the public can come and visit. And the goals at that time were permanent preservation of the site, so it would always be available to the public. Archaeological investigation, since this was a river crossing and a campsite. It was a great opportunity to try to do archaeological investigations and see evidence of past immigrant activity here. And then the third goal was to create a destination spot. River crossings, like I said, river crossings just aren't common along immigrant trails. They are, but they're usually in private hands and they've been developed. And so that's how this all became about. The Sublette County Historical Society, as part of the deal, agreed to take over ownership of the property and manage it and keep it up. We have done multiple archaeological investigations on the site. That has been somewhat disappointing because we found that this is a river floodplain, and almost all of the area over the last 150 years has been washed over so many times by the river back and forth that it has really taken away all the evidence that was here before, with the exception of the island. The old island that was here has some pretty intact soils, and we have found evidence of the immigrants here. We found lots of bullets, wagon parts, wagon staples, found domestic things like butter knives and candlestick holders and cut nails or square nails. Found handmade black powder bullets. We found melted lead for where they were making the bullets. So there's definitely evidence of the immigrants being here, but not as much as we had expected. Most of it is washed away. We are also standing where the river is, right in the middle of the old island. In the 1950s, 100 years after the immigrants were here, the river cut through the middle of the island, and so there's no longer an island. But the park contains part of what used to be the old island. The park is now 100 acres. There is a 1-mile walking path with 9 different interpretive signs. It's a really peaceful, enjoyable place to come and get to see what the immigrants encountered. So the Oregon-California Trail Association was an integral part of making this happen. Probably one of the most prominent. They have volunteers in all the major states that have trails, and those volunteers sit on boards, specifically sit on consultations like happened with this park. Because of people like Fern and Fred Linton and Dave Welch, they were part of this discussion and the proponents for this. Those of us who are local here had an opportunity to come up with some ideas and say, hey, we ought to do this, but OCTA provided the national recognition to make this actually a possibility.